Hi, friends. This episode of Big Blue Banter is brought to you by Prize Picks. Head on over to Prize Picks and use promo code BANTER, and they'll match up to $100 on a new deposit. Thank you and enjoy.
Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato, wearing a Giants shirt today. As you can see, this is a Darius Slayton shirt that I got at a tailgate.
I thought it was a Dallas Cowboys shirt because all I see is gray, navy blue, and then DA.
Dallas Cowboys shirt. Give me a break. Get this mic out of the way. That's Darius Slayton, for those who don't know. But listen, thank you to who gave this to me at a tailgate, I believe, a year ago or two. Maybe it was the Monday Night Football. Oh, my God. It was the Seattle Seahawks game last year. That's how, the Giants age you so much with horrific things they put you through that I actually thought, and I was at that game with my brother, Monday Night Football last year, and we were still hyped about it. I was still thinking this could be a good season. I think it was after. Was that right after?
It was week 4.
No, so they had already lost to San Fran, but I had excused it in my brain, short week, they're on San Fran, whatever, the line didn't hold up. And I was still hyped going into that game, but shout out to whoever gave this to me at the tailgate in that game. I'm forgetting names now. I'm forgetting who did, but really do appreciate it. I like this Darius Slayton shirt. It's a little tight on me. I think they only had mediums. I'm a large kind of guy for these shirts because otherwise it looks like, as one commenter says, I'm showing off the biceps, which these days, Nick, I got to tell you, and this is a quick aside. I want to get into the questions, and some people hate these, some people love these. I haven't lifted in 3 or 4 weeks because this is how effed up I am mentally, Nick. I believe it impacts my golf game when I lift and when I'm playing sore the next day, muscle sore. So I just can't risk losing any, I can't risk my scoring. I'm too competitive in golf and anything I do in life that I cannot risk losing any strokes just by being sore. Because I played one day last week after a huge chest day, because I finally did it the first time in 3 weeks. I did a big push day, chest, triceps, shoulders. And I noticeably was, not only did I score worse, I felt worse. So anyway, I don't know why I got into that whole aside, but thank you for this Darius Slayton shirt. And today what we're doing is a post-draft mailbag. We know you love the mailbags. One thing we've added now, because I've seen in the comment section, is that the YouTubers felt like, or our YouTube followers felt like they didn't get a chance to hear their voices heard. They don't follow us on Twitter, or they don't use Twitter. So now, if you're on YouTube and watching this, you can get your questions answered too. On the community page, on our main YouTube page, I can ask for mailbag questions, and I did this morning, and I got some questions there. So I see that it works. So we're going to start with those questions today because I want to let the YouTube listeners feel heard. So Nick, let's start there with a question from Gav Reed, who says, I've been loving the videos, boys. My one question is this: how much better do we actually think the offensive line will be with our free agency pickups? And 2, how much faith do we have in Carmen Brasillo to improve Evan Neal and JMS specifically on the offensive line? Thanks, and I love you all. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, so how do we want to quantify better? Do we want to use some sort of scale? On a scale from 1 to 10, how much better are they going to be?
I think that's fair.
Maybe with last year's offensive line being a 2, a 2.5. I think the Giants' offensive line, with the additions that they made, they have the ceiling of being an 8. That's their ceiling. Evan Neal develops. JMS hits a second-year stride. Andrew Thomas is healthy the entire season. Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon are above-average starters. Ceiling, 8. Reality suggests I think they're probably going to be around a 5, like a league average type of offensive line. I think there's enough contingency plans in place that if Evan Neal sucks, they can kick Jermaine Illuminor out, who has worked with Carmen Brasillo in the past. To your second question, I don't really know how exactly to look at Carmen Brasillo and say, yeah, he's going to develop Evan Neal. It's blind faith at this point. There needed to be a change because Bobby Johnson was not getting through to him. So hopefully this guy from the Raiders, who had a solid offensive line with, I would say, adequate talent. There wasn't a ton of talent on the Raiders offensive line. So I would say it's just blind faith at this point, and I'm just hoping that Carmen Brasillo can, but there's really nothing for me to add that suggests, oh yeah, he definitely will.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's interesting, Nick. So to answer the first part of the question, I like how you did it with that scale because it makes it quantifiable and easier for me to understand. I think in my mind, we're pretty similar on that, Nick, but I have a little bit of a lower ceiling. My ceiling would be 6'5", I think. I just think there's been enough bad NFL tape with Evan Neal that even if he took a jump, I'm not sure it's to the level I thought he might be.
I said ceiling though, man.
No, I know. And I honestly don't even think the ceiling is 8.5 personally.
Okay.
I don't. I've soured a bit on Neal. I guess that's where it comes. Like ceiling for me was if I was thinking about this right after they drafted Neal, yes, I've just kind of lost that ceiling of Neal in my mind. I still think Neal can get to a floor that's acceptable and that I'm kind of like okay with and good with for what he is. I always kind of viewed him as more of a floor prospect, but I also saw a little ceiling there that I may not see anymore. Same thing goes for JMS, a prospect I wasn't really that thrilled with to begin with, and now he's 25. I think less of a ceiling, more of a floor for both of those two, which kind of leads me more to 6'5". As far as though where the reality is, I'm kind of aligned exactly with you. 4, 5, or 5 for me. I think they can get to league average. And I think not only can they get there, I think they will. And I think Brasil had a league average unit, if not better, with the Raiders. And I think he had less talent to work with the Raiders. So I think that's really important to note as far as where we think the reality could be. Now, floor, that's a whole nother story because
2.5, baby.
Yeah, I think you're right to say 2. Well, if last year was 2.5, I don't think it can get as bad as last year. I really don't. I don't think. I mean, it could if you're as unlucky with the injuries, but it's hard to imagine the injury front can be as unlucky.
But the thing is, we've said that for so many years.
I know,
man.
we have.
It's crazy. We're like, oh man, remember when Wes Martin was starting and all these names that we can just conjure up from the past. And then it happened last year again after investments in the offensive line. We're like, oh well, we drafted a center. Oh, we got Josh Zudo. He could be the swing this. Oh, maybe all of it was bullshit. So now I'm just hoping with 4 free agents that they added, that won't be the case with free agents who have proven at least to some degree that they're competent enough to step in and play at an NFL level. Whereas the rookies that they tried to plug into those roles, they all sucked. And that was enhanced when the Giants went out and signed Justin Pugh off the freaking couch. And he came in and was their most competent freaking offensive lineman last season, which says something. And I think Joe Shane read that and was like, okay, we're going to invest in veteran free agents who at least have a baseline of understanding of how to play freaking football. Because these rookies, we're not developing them. That's a coaching problem right now that we have. And they suck, to be frank. They're not taking to the coaching. They can't play out here. They're all liabilities. And every rookie, and we can dive into such a huge conversation on this. Maybe it's for another day. Every rookie the Giants have brought in on the offensive line has not developed since Andrew Thomas.
Good point. And that's a great conversation, Nick, because it can lead me to so many directions. Like, one, how much of Andrew Thomas' development is on him alone? Like, I think that most of that is him. And I kind of think like this goes back to our whole developmental league thing with offensive linemen specifically. I think a lot of this comes down to them personally. Can they develop? And that goes to the second part of this listener's question. Thank you so much. I don't know how much faith I want to put in Carmen Brasil because I almost want to put more weight on the actual players to develop. And in that sense, like, yes, I can look at Carmen Brasil's track record. He did a good job with these Raiders. He took a lot of like quote unquote no names and got them to play a high level for what the expectation was. But I feel like I can make that same success story for Robert Hunt and all these other, and not Robert Hunt.
You're talking about the guy who's in Florida right now.
Yes. What's his name?
Yes.
Whatever his name is. We forget
Rob
already.
Sale.
It's Rob Sale. This is how many guys we've cycled through. It's unbelievable. Bobby Johnson, all these guys you can say had at some point something good in their track record, just like Brasil. But in the end, I think a lot of it comes down to the players. And this was told to me off the record, but I spoke with a Giants player, a current player on the roster. I don't want to say how I know him, but Nick knows. And he had a really interesting opinion because I asked him a lot of stuff about the Giants. And what I asked him about was the offensive line specifically. And in his opinion, Bobby Johnson was not to blame for the Giants offensive line. In his opinion, Bobby Johnson was quote unquote a good coach. So I don't know. Like, that's the thing that always interests me when I hear players say that to me. I'm like, we're all blaming it on Bobby Johnson, this and that. The development is not there. I don't know if Bobby Johnson has a magic wand that can like help these guys develop. Sometimes it's on them. So a lot of this comes down to that.
And I don't want to spend too much time here, but I think it's really important. Last year, before the season, we said that the front office derelicted their duty with the offensive line and put way too much chips in the Josh Azudu basket. Because we all write Josh Azudu off as a bust. I think it's somewhat unfair. I understand why we do it, but he was put into almost an impossible situation by the front office. What would we say before the season, especially as the season declined? We were like, there were just so many calculated risks that Joe Shane took, and they all blew up in his face. They all resulted in a catastrophe. Every calculated risk the New York Giants took, they got the 99th percentile of shit hit them right in the freaking face. Every single one. The tight end situation, the offensive line situation, injuries, and just bad situations. They all manifested themselves, and it made the front office look really bad last season.
You're 100% right. And I think about that, part of the calculated risk, you discussed them specifically on the offensive line. And again, we're taking time on this question, but it's a great question. So I feel like it's worth unpacking. a lot of it was they put a lot of weight on guys who didn't have a lot of NFL reps. Evan Neal, John Michael Schmitz, Josh Azudu, even Ben Bredesen to an extent, not a lot of reps. McKethan, too. Another guy with not a lot of reps. That's why this offseason, people are getting so mad they didn't use this 4th-round pick and 5th-round pick and an offensive lineman or even a 3rd-round pick. Meanwhile, they're looking at it like we put a lot of weight on rookies and guys and second-year guys who didn't have a lot of reps. Now let's put some weight on guys with reps, right? Illuminor, Runyon, Stinney, Schlottman to an extent, like guys who have actually had reps at the NFL level. Let's not put him in there, but guys with reps at the NFL level. And it's different. It's a different approach. And I kind of am more for it just because of what we've seen with the whole, let's develop them. Let's let the young rookies take their lumps, because I've seen too many breakdowns mentally. I've seen too many communication errors with the stunts, just things that just shouldn't be happening at an NFL level. All right, James Reese, or Jamesy 2200, I think it is. Wow, I didn't say that right. Says, I love the show, guys. Dan, we should play golf sometime soon while you try to break 90 and meet 80. I frequent the Knoll East. My Giants question is, would you rather have moved up 4 spots more in round 3 to get Trey Benson, weighing the potential cost, versus getting Tracy in round 5 where we did, and potentially costing us Theo Johnson, let's say? Interesting.
I think this is interesting. And Trey Benson is a much better prospect than Tyrone Tracy. I think I'm okay with just staying pat, getting Theo Johnson, the upside of Theo Johnson, adding another competent young tight end to this roster, and then bringing Tracy in as more of a flyer. Whereas Trey Benson, I think Trey Benson has like true number 1A type of running back talent. And that's how Arizona will likely use him once James Conner is a little bit over the hill. But I think I'm still okay with staying pat and getting Theo, the upside of Theo.
Yep, it's a great question. It's interesting. It makes us think.
Definitely.
I would prefer to have Theo and Tracy. Personally, I really like Theo. Maybe if they had taken a different guy in round 4, I could have felt differently about it. But they took my guy in Theo Johnson, and I just see so much upside. And I think everybody should watch the breakdown you did of Theo Johnson. All these video breakdowns you did on our page are phenomenal. I just got through them all, except for I have one more to go. I have to do Musau, but I've seen them all, and they're just really perfect, exactly what I would want in a film breakdown, because they could, and in my opinion, anyone can listen. You don't have to have a knowledge base of X and O's, but it does help for sure. And it got me even more hyped about Theo Johnson, because there's some stuff in there that you look and you rewatch and you're like, I could see that translating to the NFL game. I'm not so sure I say that about every prospect. So I'll take that one. As far as the golf goes, I'm not even thinking about breaking 90 right now. 90? Are you out of your mind? I got to keep the expectations reasonable here. I'm hoping to consistently break 100 for the rest of this golf season. I would be mad if I could get back over 100. I know I'm going to have days where I'm going to go over 100, but I want to be most 80, 90% sub 100 for me to feel good about the progress that I'm making. And I'm down to play anytime. So for sure, hit me up. You'll find me on Twitter or something like that, and let's play. I'd love to play with some listeners. I think it would be a great time. Digital Biz for 25 asks, what do you think of next year's quarterback class compared to the 2024 class? Specifically, what is the opinion of Nick's mustache? What does that mustache think of the 2024 class?
Nick's mustache is sentient. It has its own opinions, but just like Nick himself, he doesn't know shit about the 2025 quarterback class, and I ain't going to sit here and act like I do.
I don't either, but I do like some of the initial things I'm seeing from Carson Beck. He was 6th in EPA per play, 5th in, there was another stat now I'm blanking on it, but also 2nd in, doesn't take a lot of sacks, but he also, I don't love his arm talent. I like his arm talent. I don't love it. It's going to be tough for me to find my guy, but we'll see. It's new. It's early. We'll see what we can get. I'm going to say this. Keep in mind my favorite sleeper in the class. You're only going to have to use a 2nd-round pick on him because his frame is going to prevent him from going any higher. But keep an eye on my boy Noah Fafita out of Arizona, because this kid's got arm talent, the real type of arm talent. Watch him play. That's what arm talent really looks like, especially for a 5'11" kid. I mean, some of the throws he makes on the run. I know he's 5'11". No, he's not even 5'11", because I went into a deep dive and I saw an interview with his high school coach, and they were talking about the height, because obviously it's a topic. And he's like 5'11". He's 5'10" in cleats. So that really means like 5'9".
Coach doing him dirty. Come on,
no,
Coach.
but he is kind of doing him dirty, but it's fair and it's funny. But yeah, we're not going to have much on the class just yet for quarterbacks. Okay. George Papazahario. I think is no, this is not an Italian name. This is Greek, I think. So Papazario. I don't know. Papazario. George Papazario. That's what I'm going with. I think it's right. He says, if Drew Lock really isn't competition with Daniel Jones to be the starter, as both Mike Garafolo and Daniel Jeremiah have suggested, what is their analysis situation? Meaning, what does each quarterback bring to the table that the other doesn't? That's a good question. What which one can take advantage of some of the explosive potential this team has amassed over the past 2 years? For example, Nabers, Hyatt, and Wan'Dale Robinson.
So I don't think
Tracy to that mix, by the way, would you?
Yeah, I would add Tracy to that mix too. I don't love the Giants quarterback situation. That's no secret at this point. I think there should be an open competition. And if you do factor in the contract stipulations, Drew Lock should be the lead to actually be the quarterback of this team. But if you want to just say it's an honest situation, Drew Lock has a better arm and a bigger arm than Daniel Jones. I've seen the film from Seattle. Drew Lock was a little bit reluctant to throw the football when windows came open. I don't know if that was because he was inherently reluctant or it was just a little bit slow to see it actually develop on that specific play. He only had I think he started 3 games. One of them, he didn't practice with the first team until Friday because Geno Smith couldn't go. So I think that was a San Francisco game, which was his worst game against a really good defense as well. So we don't have a lot of Drew Lock tape to go off of. I know Daniel Jones, though, because I've watched a lot of Daniel Jones, and Daniel Jones doesn't create those explosive plays with his arm because he's a little bit reluctant, as I've said so many damn times. And now he's coming off of an injury where his biggest asset was being a tall athlete at the quarterback position who used his legs really efficiently. So I'm willing to roll the dice with Drew Lock. I just think it's a little bit of an incomplete analysis because we really only seen 3 games. In those 3 games, he will pull the trigger, but he also pulls a trigger and throws it into double coverage, which is a problem too. So you might have a higher turnover rate with a player like Drew Lock. So it just depends on what type of football you want. But to your question, if you're asking about explosive plays specifically, throwing the football, I think I'm going to put my chips on the Drew Lock side of things rather than the Daniel Jones side of things.
It's a great question. Thank you so much. And I liked your answer, Nick. I would say Drew Lock offers more arm talent, like Nick said, more willingness to throw tight windows and to take chances with the football with his arm and with his mind. But I think he's going to be less on time in the offense than Daniel Jones. So I think Daniel Jones, even though Daniel Jones isn't the most on time in the offense, I think he'll keep the offense a little bit more on time. I think Daniel Jones is going to have better chance to make plays with his legs even after the injury, I guess I would say, Nick.
He's a better overall athlete for sure.
Much better overall athlete, even post-injury. I think most guys come back from the ACL and still have their athleticism. Maybe he's a little more reluctant to run. I don't know. That's a possibility. That's something we can't describe. But I think the biggest thing is kind of the unknown. And what I mean by that, Nick, is, and to our listeners, is we don't really know how Drew Lock will interpret Brian Daboll's system. We don't know how Drew Lock's going to see the offense. We don't know how Drew Lock's going to see a play that Daniel Jones sees. So, for example, a play that's run and has a multiple different route combinations within it, Daniel Jones might see that play pre-snap and feel like, okay, I'm going to hit the backside drag. We've seen him do this a lot. He throws the underneath stuff. He might see the first read, doesn't like it, throw it. Drew Lock might see this completely different. The exact same play, he might read it completely different. And we know this because DeVito read plays differently than Jones within the same system last year. And Tyrod Taylor read plays differently than Jones within the same system this year. So I think that's the biggest difference for me. It's just an unknown as far as how Drew Lock will process the system. But one thing we know is, well, we don't know this actually, but the expectation is Daniel Jones is not going to be ready for spring OTAs, though he is. There are pictures of him, practicing with the team or taking some snaps with it, whatever it may be. If the projection is correct and he's not there until training camp, what we know is we're going to get some glimpses of how Drew Lock is going to process the system because he's going to get all the first team reps with the offense.
I implore people to go back and find a video that I released after like Tommy DeVito's second or third start. And it was the differences between Daniel Jones and Tommy DeVito. I think it's our highest viewed video on YouTube. It has over 10K views. If you go and find that, you'll see just how the offense changed and the play calling changed because specifically Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, they were running a lot more sail concepts and Tommy DeVito was actually throwing outside the numbers from the pocket, which is not something Daniel Jones does. He does not throw outside the numbers from the pocket. Most of the passes that Daniel Jones has when they are outside of the numbers towards the sideline, they're either 9 routes or they're rollouts. He doesn't stand in the pocket and then layer the football over the top of defenders and hit wide receivers in stride as they're going out of bounds. Tommy DeVito was doing that. Tyrod Taylor was doing that. And the offense incorporated more sail type of concepts, which is a 3-level concept where the number 2, well, it depends on how you want to run it, but there's a receiver running a corner route off of a clear out with a flat option. Jones threw that flat option when they did run the sail. Tommy DeVito and Tyrod, they were hitting the 9 and they were hitting the sail, creating more explosive plays. And then sail concepts were being called much more often when they were the quarterback. So I implore people to go and watch that video. It has a lot of statistics to back up my argument there, which is just kind of objective numbers at this point. But yeah, no, I think Drew Lock, he could, as you said, he could easily see things in a different way than Daniel Jones, which could result in more explosive play opportunity.
And I want to make something clear, Nick. What Nick just said is not an opinion. It's not an opinion at all, actually, because, and I'll tell you why it's not an opinion, that, the two quarterbacks, DeVito and Tyrod, threw more sound concepts and they called the offense a little bit differently. It's based on the fact of not just the tape, which we have outlined on this page, and you can go back and watch and learn for yourself. That's a fact. Tape is fact. Tape is not an opinion, but also based on the actual numbers. Once again, numbers are not an opinion. They are stated numbers for a reason. Daniel Jones attempted what in 2022, Nick? His breakout season, it was 13 passes, I think, or 20, was it 33 attempts that were 10 plus yards and outside the numbers, correct? That's the exact.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they're in that video.
I believe it was 33 passes that were outside the numbers, and I think he completed
from the pocket.
From the pocket, right? The exact thing you just said, from the pocket outside the numbers. That's what so again, you can talk about other things and they could be opinions, but that's an actual fact. He only attempted 33 of them. That's all he did. That was over a full season in 2022. And he only completed, I believe, I don't remember the number, it was in the 20s, I believe, or even less. So these aren't, again, this is just something you can look up. It's not really an opinion when it's backed up by facts, by both film and by the numbers. So it is what it is there. And maybe he could see the offense differently, but I'm not so sure about that. What we do know is we don't know how Lock could see the offense. It's up for debate. Okay. Enzo Baldanza. Okay. That's what I'm going with. Enzo Baldanza says, what are your reasonable expectations for Deontay Banks in year 2? I think his rookie season was encouraging, but I don't want to set unrealistic standards for a year 2 corner entering a new scheme. Good question.
Good question. And thank you so much. I have high expectations for Deontay Banks. Now, cornerback position, it's a difficult position to have high expectations for because they could play really well and then get burnt on one play. And everyone's like, oh, he sucks, right? It's a very tough position from a grading standpoint. You don't have a lot of Patrick Surtains and Sauce Gardners. And I feel like people are like, Sauce Gardner is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's not. Sauce Gardner gets away with a lot. And the initial impression of Sauce Gardner as a rookie was that this guy is amazing. And he was. But now he gets burnt on certain plays and people kind of like have excuses for him. So I think like perception is really formulated early on in one's career. But with Deontay Banks, I'm not worried about him. That doesn't mean he's going to win every rep, but I think he can play in any system because he is that talented of a player and he has the athletic ability and the processing, which is something that really came up on tape last year. We talked about it all season. I'm very encouraged by his zone awareness and his spatial awareness on the Washington interception for one, the New England one. He's good in zone. So I don't think the transition to Shane Bowen's system is going to hurt Deontay Banks. So I remain optimistic about his talents.
I love that you brought that up because that's where I was going to go with it. And I just want to reiterate what Nick said. There were some really, really good moments from a processing standpoint in zone from Deontay Banks. I lean on our evaluation of him as a prospect. We loved him. We both had him as a my guy. I know I did, and I think you did as well last year.
I did.
We felt like that was incredible value for the Giants as late as they got him. The film was really fun. If you want to see a fun game from college, to see kind of like his upside, even though it wasn't perfect, no corner's going to have a perfect game. Watch him against Marvin Harrison Jr. from the season before this one. It was a fun watch. And it's really, I think, what put him on the radar of a lot of people at the beginning as a first round potential pick. I think expectations wise, I think he can make this big jump and be one of those like really, really good corners in the NFL. I got a good feeling about where he's at. Okay. Kenny G. Leviathan asks, Kenny G. Leviathan asks, this is another great question. Having Nabers as our wide receiver 1 is huge for the offense. Which complement receiver do you see benefiting the most from Nabers within the offense? Slayton, Hyatt, or Robinson? I love this question.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the defense that they're playing against.
Yes.
It's context. It's a lot. Some defenses are going to be a little bit more scared of Jalen Hyatt's speed, possibly, which could open up more opportunities for Robinson, whereas some defenses might be playing more single high, leading to more opportunities for Hyatt downfield. So I really think it depends. But I'll just say, if I had to pick one, I'm going to say Wan'Dale Robinson. I think Wan'Dale Robinson is like a really good football player, And we haven't really necessarily seen his ceiling quite yet. And it's despite the fact that his measurables are so diminutive too, which makes me love him even more.
Agreed with that. I feel like even the fact that he is an outlier from all those standpoints, the measurement standpoints, the film has been really good. I know it's hard for people to process that because the stats haven't backed it up yet. But I think a lot of people have to come to the realization that wide receiver stats are a lot dependent on the quarterback. And, he can't control that situation. But my answer would be Wan'Dale too. I think ideally, Nick, in an ideal world, if we had Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, even Drake May as the quarterback prospect, this may not be year 1, but the ceiling of Drake May, It would be Hyatt, because I think that there's going to be a lot of one-on-ones open up for Hyatt on the other side of the formation, because so much attention is for Nabers.
Yeah.
But the current situation we have isn't really a quarterback who targets that area of the field that often. And you'd have to trust Hyatt to win a lot of these one-on-ones, to win jump balls, to high point the football, win these one-on-ones that aren't always going to be perfect. He kind of showed a lot of it last year, those sideline toe drag catches, some of the balls he high pointed. I felt like he did a really good job of, but it would be a trust situation for the quarterback there in these one-on-ones. So I think realistically, with Jones as the quarterback, who most likely will be the starter, it's Wan'Dale who will benefit the most. Other side of the formation, Wan'Dale gets more space to work with, less defenders around the vicinity, quick short layup throws on either side for Nabers, and Wan'Dale is kind of what Jones likes to do there. Okay, Gerald Kavanaugh asks, this is old news, but I'd love to see Dan rant about the report by Connor Hughes suggesting John Elway wanted to trade up badly for his quarterback, second overall pick in the 2018 draft for Sam Darnold. He loved Darnold. And Gettleman didn't even answer the phone because he was locked in on Barkley. Okay, the report is linked below. Okay, let me just say something. I respect this, Gerald, and I'm happy you asked this, and I know some people appreciate it, some people don't as far as these go. But rants, they cannot be called upon or forced. They have to be natural. These Dan rants are just going to come when the situation arises. There's no, you can't ask for a rant. So this rant will not happen today, maybe in the future. Daniel B asks, Coinboy, his name is, asks, are fans being overly negative about the state of the team? I feel like 2023 was a fluke due to significant injuries that happened early. I think we have the legit talent to compete. Do you think the state of the roster is being overblown and we can truly be competitive this year?
I think the NFC allows the Giants to be competitive for the wild card. I just think a lot of Giant fans want more than that, and they deserve more than that. And they've been starved of that for quite a while. And they don't believe in the face of the franchise right now, in Daniel Jones, who has been here since 2019, who received a contract and he has one good season where he was still historically bad from an explosive play standpoint in a league that's predicated on creating explosive plays. So I think that's one reason why there's a big contingent of the New York Giants fan base that is upset with the New York Giants right now. And I can understand them to some degree. I think there are only a finite amount of options to replace your quarterback, especially after you invest in that quarterback. And it's unclear to me that there was a quarterback option who would, I guess, augment the Giants' chances to immediately compete this season. And because of that, I think they're doing the best with what they have. It's not a great situation, but I understand why some fans are frustrated at the same time, if that makes sense.
I think that was a great answer, and it does make sense. And I think it's probably exactly where you are at, Nick, and exactly where I'm at. I think with a little bit less frustration, obviously, than those fans. Those fans are very negative. I'm not so negative because I think the roster has been improving. And we'll get to that maybe on this show or another show. We might do a separate show on that, comparing where we're at. But I just look at what they've done, and I feel like the defensive line has a chance to be better than it's been in, I don't know, God knows when, because I think there's a realistic chance Kayvon takes a jump in year 3. Players develop. Year 3 is a good year for it. And then having Brian Burns on the defensive line as well is really going to make an impact as well.
What's going on, Big Blue Banter listeners? I'm excited for the football season for several reasons. And one of those reasons is Prize Picks, which is North America's largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform. And it's so simple to use. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including professionals, sharks, and people who are going to exploit you, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you just watch the winnings roll in. It's very simple to play and gives you a little extra skin. I've set my picks in less than 60 seconds. There are so many stats to choose from, and the withdrawals of funds are easy and quick. Dan and I will be adding a segment to our show before every game where we pick our favorite stats, more or less yards or touchdowns, what have you, and we'll be discussing why from a scheme, matchup, and game theory perspective. I love their promotions and how easy their interface is to operate at Prize Picks. I may select more on tackles for a loss from Bobby Okereke or Kayvon Thibodeau next game. They also do other sports as well. It's a really cool experience. Please join Dan and I in the fun of Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. You will not regret it. You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
And we could get into position by position, but I think we should actually save that for maybe a separate pod, Nick, and we'll get into that. But I agree with the general premise here. The negativity around the roster is a little overblown. I think there are areas that maybe you could say on paper aren't like one-to-one improved, like McKinney to Newman, for example. But just the general what they could be, stronger on the D-line, stronger on the O-line, more explosive at receiver and even running back. To some extent, you may say, oh, what, Barkley? But I again, maybe not more explosive than Barkley, but as a, just an explosive weapon in space, I should say, like Tracy. There's reason to believe, in my mind at least, that there's more reason for upside roster-wise. Again, trench play matters, and I feel like they could be better in the trenches on both sides of the ball, in addition to what they can offer with Nabers on the offense. He's going to make a big difference, man. Like, they haven't had a Malik Nabers in this offense since Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, anything close to that since Odell Beckham Jr., and not even remotely close. All right, let's get to the next one here.
I got one thing I want to say real quick on that.
Yep.
It's just because I haven't heard anybody posit this idea yet.
Yeah.
And this is like, I don't know how much this is going to result or yield success for the New York Giants, but it couldn't have been a healthy environment last year when your defensive coordinator was trying to subvert you as a head coach. Without that distraction and that reality festering in the locker room, maybe you'll have more continuity as a coaching staff, which would result in maybe better football. And I know that that's not a 1-for-1, like, oh, well, we all love each other, or we can all really work together and there's not distractions. That means we're going to win games. Of course not. But there was some shit last year, bro, that we kind of never, like, we kind of like forget about. There was a lot of like a lot of shit going on in the locker room.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, a healthier locker room from that standpoint, more on coaches on the same page is going to make a big difference. So we'll see what happens there, but I'm with you on that. Okay, John Ann asked a question that I guess organically flows into this one. So maybe now is the time we can kind of break out and dive into this thing. Because he says, hey, guys, what positions do you think we actually improved or got worse in? I think this plays the biggest factor in how the team will play next season. So maybe we just break it out now, Nick, and dive into this thing. And
yeah, let's do it.
Is the roster better now than it was in 2022? Because I know I've seen that on Twitter a lot this week. Like, wow, the Giants roster is actually worse than it is in 2022. And so let's unpack it and see where we stand on that, Nick. So let's go position by position. Let's start there. Let me set the stage. I want you to break it down, and then I want you to also qualify how much it actually matters, as in how much the difference matters. Because we could say it's better in now versus then, or it's better then versus now. But if it's only by a little bit, it's not going to make as much of a difference. So I want to make sure we factor in the size gap of what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the quarterback position is a little bit worse now, just because Tyrod Taylor has more of a proven track record than Drew Lock. I still think there is an unknown about Drew Lock. I aspire to see the ceiling type of thing inside of my soul where I'm like, well, maybe Drew Lock. And I think there's probably some fool's gold there, if I'm going to be completely honest. But I don't think we've seen the best of Drew Lock. And Tyrod Taylor was a much stable player that would rise the floor of the quarterback room from 2023. So I'm going to say it's slightly worse this year.
I think that's fair. I would say it's slightly worse as well, though I am also intrigued by how Drew Lock would process Brian Daboll's system. But I think I was a big fan of Tyrod Taylor. I know he made some boneheaded mistakes at the end of a couple games last year that really stood out in fans' mind. But I really think if they thought about it a little bit more and decided, wait a second, but if he didn't have those explosive throws in that game, would they even be in position to have won or lost that game? And the answer is no, they wouldn't be in that position. So that also factors in. One play at the end always has more weight on our minds as fans, but every play does matter in the game. So if you don't have those explosive throws earlier, you're not going to get those chances at the end of a game. And remember, even in that Buffalo game, he converted a 4th and 7 to Jalen Hyatt, where that pocket was done. It was collapsing on him. He navigated that pocket so brilliantly to find himself a new launch point to get that ball out to Hyatt. So just things to consider on that front. So I think they downgraded a bit there. I also think going into 2023 versus going into 2022, Jones is not as high of a quarterback. Like going into 2023, it was impossible not to be high on him. He was coming off that Minnesota Vikings game. It looked like he was ascending as a quarterback. He had a great preseason and training camp, if you want to count that, but it was worth discussing. Thought maybe he could, in the sense that, okay, maybe it's clicking for him in training camp and preseason. Maybe the offense is. He's seeing it better. He's processing it differently. And then he got injured, and he got another neck injury, and then he tore his ACL. So going into 2024, it's hard to imagine a guy coming off an ACL and a neck injury. And I know some people want to throw out everything they saw on film in 2023, but this guy against the Niners and Seahawks had legitimate problems. One against the Niners after the game, the 4 or 5 Niners defensive players, they don't do this. This doesn't happen in the NFL. You don't see this happen. Came out and called out the opposing quarterback. You don't see that happen often at all. Go look it up. They don't do that a lot in the NFL. And all 4 or 5 of them said the same thing. We knew from the very first snap he wasn't going to throw downfield. We knew he looked scared in the pocket, and we knew that everything was going to go underneath. Then the very next week, the Seattle Seahawks rookie defender said, I did my film study. I knew he was a one-read quarterback. That's how I pick 6, the pick 6 that cost him the game. That's how I jumped that route for pick 6. So like these things should be factored in. It can't just be we throw it all out with the bathwater. It is what it is. The O-line was so bad. So I think we're worse there. And, the Drew Lock, the Tyrod thing. So I think slightly worse, I would say, just because I don't think Tyrod makes enough of a difference because he's still a backup quarterback. It's not like you're going from starter to starter and you're getting worse in that sense. So I'd say slightly worse there. Running back, go to you on that one.
Running back from a talent standpoint, they're definitely worse. Saquon Barkley is far superior than Devin Singletary and Tyrone Tracy Jr. But where this conversation gets interesting is you got to factor in the contracts. So who would you rather have? Saquon Barkley with the contract?
Let's take the contract out of it. Let's just see roster-wise.
But I think you have to weigh that in if you want a real clear picture. Okay. But if we're just talking about talent on the football field, then yeah, they are worse than they were last year.
They're worse than they are last year, but I will say this. I'm kind of intrigued to see Devin Singletary in this system, and I'm kind of intrigued to see if there are areas of Singletary's game that can improve upon what Barkley put on the field. I'm just going to be honest. To me, Barkley, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, was not the same runner post-injury against the Bears. He was not the same yards after contact runner, and that is not just evidenced by me saying it as some kind of opinion based on the tape, which it is. The yards per carry, yards after contact per attempt is way down from his pre-injury form. We're talking almost a full half yard or more down. That's all that's context, that's stats, that's facts. And as far as the explosiveness, You cannot compare it and say that these are the same. He's the same runner he was in 2018. He had 9 runs of 40+ yards behind a bad offensive line in 2018. He had 1 run of 40+ yards in the last 2 seasons. 9 and 1 in 2018, 1 in the last 2. That explosive rate is way down. So it's just not the same runner. I'm excited to see if maybe there are some plays that Singletary could process a little differently and maybe get a yards on. They're still obviously worse at running back, though. So I think they're definitely considerably worse at running back. Let's go to receiver.
They're much better with Malik Nabers.
Yes. That one, I don't know if it needs analysis. They're much better with Nabers. That's pretty obvious. They got a player who Nick and I believe is one of the rare prospects from a draft standpoint, one of the best receivers we've ever scouted, I would say, for me. And, that means not like, we're not saying he's the best, but he's in that range for me of the elite guys I've ever studied doing this thing. So much better receiver. Tight end, I would say they're much better. I mean, that's obvious.
This is where it gets interesting. People are like,
Waller.
Darren Waller. I'm saying they're better now in 2024 than they were in 2023. And I get it. Darren Waller, he's amazing when he's healthy. Not healthy often. And there was no depth behind Daniel Bellinger and Darren Waller. It was Lawrence freaking Cater, who is still on the roster now. And you add Chris Manhertz, and you add Jack Stoll, and you add Theo Johnson. So you have at least 4 tight ends if Darren Waller doesn't decide to play football, who can at least block. And 2 of them have some receiving upside. Now, is it as dynamic as Darren Waller? No, but I would rather have that tight end group than last year's tight end group.
And
10 times out of 10.
Yes. And the need, and I'll make this case, the need for a Waller type is not as much in this offense now that Nabers is here. Now that Nabers has arrived, I'd rather have the 2-way tight ends like Theo Johnson and Daniel Bellinger on the field, to be completely honest with the situation. Last year, they needed a Waller. They didn't have that. He was a big part of their pass game. They didn't really have much in the pass game they could rely on in the intermediate and vertical area of the game. Now that's Nabers. He is your guy. And you're going to have a lot more 11 personnel because Nabers is on this team. And with that, I'd rather have that 1 tight end and 11 personnel, to be quite frank, be Theo or Bellinger, who can block or who can run, who can make it so the defense can't just guess pass when the guy is on the field. Not to say Waller isn't a good blocker for what he was. He was actually kind of a good blocker for his frame and size. But that frame and size is very limiting as a blocker, as we've seen with players like Evan Ingram in the past. So I actually kind of feel like the room is better there. Offensive line.
They're much better right now than they were last year.
Without a doubt. Not even that one. I mean, look, it's not a guarantee. I don't want to sit here and say things have been fixed on the offensive line. I know you don't either, Nick. We want to watch it with our own eyes and see it in the real regular season games for maybe a 4, 5, 6 game sample size before we can get confident about it. Which I don't know. Can you imagine? When's the last time the Giants have had like a 4, 5, or 6 game straight sample size of above average offensive line play?
It's been a while. I'm trying to rack my brain there. See, even in 2022, like a lot of people,
know if we had it for 6
I
games
don't think we did. Mark Lewinsky was a pretty big liability on the offensive line. Like the beginning of the season, though, I'll say this about the 2022 Giants. The beginning of the season was terrible, right? Like Daniel Jones was running for his life. It was really bad. The Chicago Bears game, they were like, dude, I don't even really want to throw the football. Let's just run play action bootlegs and give the freaking football to Saquon Barkley. It stabilized a little bit more mid-season, and then it got a little bit worse during the Washington games and around that time, and then it stabilized again throughout the playoffs. But I don't think there was like a 5-game stretch where we're like, yes, this offensive line is excellent, because they had some liabilities and some issues, specifically on the right side with Evan Neal and Mark Lewinsky.
Yeah, you're right. And I think back to that Bears game, it made me laugh because I'm just like, I usually think quarterbacks are like the biggest factors in any game or, in any kind of scheming. But I think in that game, the Giants literally looked at it like Dexter Lawrence is so much better than Mustafa. So much better than Mustafa right now that we don't even need to call an offense. We're just going to run the ball, run bootleg, run Jones on bootleg, do a couple slide throws, run the ball, more Jones bootleg, and just let Dexter Lawrence single-handedly destroy Mustafa and win this game. The Bears should have done something there. Like, I don't know what it would have been, dude, but like there should have been doubles on Lawrence 100% of the plays, like a back that like lined up like in like a weird H-back type formation that just like chipped every time Lawrence destroyed Mustafa.
They couldn't do that though because the Bears had no explosiveness on offense other than their quarterback's legs. So the Giants just aligned in an odd front, 5-man fronts the entire time, isolating one-on-one blocks. It was just feast mode for Dexter Lawrence. And he loved it.
Poor Mustafa. But yeah, so O-line, I still think we can reasonably say it's better with the veterans they've added, Illuminor, Runyon. I mean, last year Glowinski was done. They had to play guys like Azudu with no snaps. They had to play guys like Bredesen with not that many snaps. McKethan was playing the beginning. Remember, we're all McKethan playing at the beginning of the year. So I think it's considerably better. I also think there's finally an actual fallback plan if Evan Neal doesn't work. Like, I know a lot of people like the kid that I'm Phillips, Tyree Phillips. But like, I feel like Tyree Phillips, I will stand by this. I didn't like Tyree Phillips' film in 2023. I liked it in 2022 to an extent. I thought it was very overrated tape in 2023. I feel like he was pushed back into quarterback's lap all the time, and I felt like he was a net negative in the run game. So I think there's an upgrade there just putting Illuminor in. So I'm going to say upgrade there. Let's flip the other side, defensive line. I think that goes without saying, a massive upgrade there.
Massive upgrade with Brian Burns. If
Despite
we're including the deep, are we including the edge rushers with the defensive linemen or no?
Yes. The whole front.
Okay, if we just look at all of it, then yes, Brian Burns himself is a massive upgrade. But if we want to isolate the defensive line and then the edge room would definitely get the nod as being much better.
And the D line gets a negative because they lose
negative. They lost Leo and they lost A'Shawn Robinson.
Yeah.
And I would say that's a pretty solid negative. Like, you have Dexter Lawrence, but
I think it goes both ways. It's a solid major upgrade to a major downgrade with the Burns versus that.
I agree.
I would say it outweighs on the Burns side because I think what he can provide will be more than what Leo could provide or A'Shawn personally.
I do agree with that if you want to combine them both. But if we're not combining them both, then that's where it gets a little interesting. And I still wonder who's going to be that starter in more passing situations, what the Giants are going to do.
Good question. Yeah.
With a pass rusher who they typically align in like 3 techs, 4 shade. Like, are they going to kick Kayvon inside and get Aziz out there, which I would support in obvious passing situations?
I think I would support that too. I still think that that's where Joe Shane's always very active from like this time until September as far as free agent pickups. And I know now's a big moment because I think Dan Duggan tweeted about this. Now these pickups that they make on free agency won't count against their compensatory pick formula.
Yeah.
So they can add more. And I think that's where the rest of this cap is going, to the defensive linemen. And they're going to add a couple guys, veterans, maybe also like a, Autry or like a Jihad Ward type to play. I think we'll start to see some depth filled out there. This is the one thing about passing on D-line in the draft. Long-term, I don't love it, but short-term, you can find guys at this position in this stage of free agency. You can't say that about all the positions. You can say that about this position. So that linebacker, what about for you, off-ball linebacker? I think pretty similar, right?
I mean, it's the same. I would say it's a little bit better just because they added Muasau, but that's like, again, it's very negligible.
Corner is an interesting one because I think on paper people will say, and they've made this case I've seen online, they're worse because they don't have Adoree and they have a couple they have one rookie in there. I think Adoree's been injured a lot during his Giants career. Adoree was not all that reliable from an injury front. So, I mean, like on paper, sure, but Adoree missed a lot of games. I'm not so sure the next guy's going to miss a lot of games. I'd still say it's a downgrade. Adoree's a veteran player, but I don't think it's as great as people make it out to be.
Well, if Deontay Banks takes the jump that we hope he takes, then that would lead me at least to consider 2024. I think I'm going to go with 2023. I think Adoree Jackson, look, he didn't have the best season last year. He's still sub 30 years old, and I think he's an above average starting cornerback in the NFL, and the Giants lost that.
Yeah, agreed.
And they added Andrew Phillips, who Andrew Phillips, like they bring Darnay Holmes back. That's cool. They signed Jalen Mills. Andrew Phillips, like that's not a player that I'm like, oh yeah, pencil him in. Like that's a guy who still needs to like prove a lot. And I'm a little bit like skeptical. Like, is this guy actually going to hit? Like, I know he has a ceiling, but I could see a path. And I don't want to like give this to or assign this to the kid right now. But if in 2 or 3 years you're saying he's another like Cordell Flott type, I'm not going to be like, oh my God, you know what I mean?
Either.
I think the ceiling is there, but there's still a lot of ironing out, as we said.
I'll say that about basically any corner that's drafted in that range of the draft. I'll stand by that. Any corner in that range of the draft has a wide range of outcomes. They can be hits or they can be misses. And I think, honestly, it's the nature of the cornerback position. It's such a hard position to play. Outside of tight end, I don't know if there's a harder position to play. You're back. Like, you're on the defense every time. I know, he's a defender. Of course he's on the defense. Duh. But, like, the way that it's set up, it's so much. Like, think about it. A pass rusher, he's on defense technically, but he's moving forward. The offensive lineman's moving backwards. The corner is moving backwards laterally. It is not easy to play that position. And especially when, as you always talk about, Nick, the rules are really set up for the receivers. Like, the receiver can put your hands on the corner. The corner can't put the hands on the receiver somehow, for some way. It's called that way. I don't want to say for some way. We know the reason. The NFL wants offense and the quarterback plays so bad league-wide. They need to do whatever they can to get offense and passing. But it is what it is. That's reality. Safety, I would say they're worse with Newman versus McKinney.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what that marks, bro?
What'd you say?
5'5".
Yeah, 5. I was just gonna say, let's recap it. They're 5'5" even.
Yeah.
So then I guess it just comes to depend on 1, the jumps that some of these players can take, and 2, how much more important it is to be good in the trenches, where I think they have improved, especially if they can get a veteran on the defensive line in free agency, versus the other places where they were better last year: corner, safety, running back, and what other one did we say? I guess slightly quarterback.
Yeah, so it would be quarterback, running back, defensive line, cornerback, and safety. They're worse.
Defensive
And then
line, yeah. Defensive line's a key one. They're going to have to find
Yeah.
something in free agency. I don't think it's even negotiable.
Wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, linebacker, which again, it's a small edge, and then
Sure.
edge itself are better.
Sure. And two of the, trench is the big thing. I mean, obviously it's going to come down to the offensive line. I think Malik Nabers makes a big difference. Just taking everything out of it, position by position. Nabers on this roster versus Nabers not on this roster. What he brings to a roster makes a massive, massive difference.
And also losing Barkley and X, those are like huge losses from a culture standpoint, from a like who is the face of your franchise type of perspective. And the only addition to that, not including the rookies who can all develop into that, and we should give them that. Obviously, Nabers and Newbin are two players who can develop into that in year one, is Brian Burns. Brian Burns is that one player that it's like, that's a face of the franchise type of player. That's oh, wow, it's 3rd and 6 Monday Night Football. Can the Giants get a stop? Brian Burns wins up the edge, gets the sack. Giants win the football game type of dude.
Yep, agreed. And that I think Nabers and Burns as the two bigger. So add Nabers and Burns, take out Barkley and McKinney, really, right? To me, because some, big time players like those four make big time impacts on your wins and losses.
Dude, I'm so glad you brought this up, dude. If you look at it that way, and there's so many different ways to look at it, but if you look at it that way, the Giants are coming out ahead.
They have to be coming out ahead.
Nabers on a rookie contract with the freaking world in front of him.
What's left of Barkley at this age after all those injuries is not what's left of Nabers. They look completely different to me. I just watched a lot of Nabers. Like, we've just went through all this Nabers film, and I'm rewatching it now that we drafted him. I'm like, this is a different level of explosion. No offense than what Barkley had. This level of Barkley.
Not even controversial.
It's not controversial. It should be obvious. And then as far as Burns versus McKinney's a safety playing off the ball, not even involved in every snap, doesn't play the post as much as we needed him to. Burns is going to be on every single snap on the line of scrimmage. There's a massive difference of what an edge can give you, in my mind, than a safety.
One thing, just because this conversation, I feel like, is pertinent to analyzing the New York Giants, and Giants Twitter is just, oh my God, is bifurcated like crazy, man. People are just at each other's throats.
Oh, it's bad right now.
I wonder, though, how the Giants are going to play the run with Brian Burns out there.
Yes, it's going to be interesting.
It is. Now, Shane Bowen used a lot of, slanting, gap exchange, stunts, all that kind of stuff. That's what Brian Burns thrived. I use that kind of loosely as a run defender with Carolina, because he's not I'm going to stand you up at the point of attack, hold my ground against an offensive tackle type of player. So I am interested to see exactly how that works. Now, the Giants' second level, I think, is going to maybe have a little bit more responsibility on their belt. Bobby Okereke and whoever the second linebacker is might have a little bit more on their plate to help out and to mask maybe some deficiencies that the Giants have at edge, especially if Kayvon Thibodeau doesn't take the step that we hope he takes in run defense.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I will say this, maybe I'm putting a little too much faith on Bowen and just his system that he's ran throughout his time with the Titans and how good they were in run defense throughout that time. Maybe that's putting a little too much credit in the system, and maybe I should be focusing more on the players that were there. And maybe, at the same time, I'm looking at Dexter Lawrence and thinking he can get a lot of this job done. I might even kind of foresee some jumps happening from the two Giants guys, Jordan Riley and DJ Davidson. I feel like if we look back at last year and just think of some of our film observations, both of them had flashes on film. Now, obviously, they have to put it all together. They have to stay healthy. They have to become more complete players. But they had flashes on film. You can't say that about every single player on this roster as far as film flashes go. Like, you could say more that based on the tape last year, we should have a better expectation for what they can do from a jump standpoint than like a Cordell Flott. But I think a lot of people look at it the other way. Like, Cordell Flott has a better chance of being a contributor within this defense than DJ Davidson and Jordan Riley, maybe based on the draft capital and things of that nature. So I think there's a potential for them as well. But I think for me, Nick, to answer this question and bring it all back, if you're looking for the reason why I'm convinced the roster has improved and the 2023 roster is better than 2022, it does come down to those two major alpha players. Malik Nabers and Brian Burns are going to have more game-changing, game-winning type plays on a consistent basis than Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney offered the team in 2023. I really feel strongly and confident about that.
I think that's a great point. I understand why other people are frustrated, and Dan and I are on the same page. We want the quarterback position to be upgraded.
Yeah, everyone does. Who the hell doesn't?
Everyone does at this point.
It's not easy to do. It's not
easy to do.
It's not easy
Exactly.
to do. And it's not like, and you could say, oh, well, if it's not easy to do, you're never going to take a chance, but there will be chances taken. Like if they give them a leash, Shane and Daboll, which I'm sure they do, and sure they will. And a good point in all this, and I've been thinking about this, Nick, I didn't put it on Twitter until today when somebody like put it up in my mentions. I thought about it is it's like people are so mad at Joe Shane. Do you want to hear what he actually did? The selfish route would have been for him to look at this draft class and be like, I'm taking JJ McCarthy, or I'm taking Penix, or I'm taking Nix. I don't really have a conviction on these guys, but guess what? I'm taking them. You want to know why? If I take them, my clock gets extended. Now I have a rookie quarterback. Now it's the first year. He sits behind the veteran. Year 2, he's still developing. Don't worry about it. Year 3, it's only his second year in the system. We need more time. It buys him all these years. That's the more selfish route a GM could have taken. The selfless route is what he did. He didn't worry about his own tenure with this team to an extent. He took the player that he believed he had a conviction on, Malik Nabers. And if you watch the tape, it's obvious to see why he had a conviction on him. But if you watch the tape of the other guys, you might not have the same conviction on those quarterbacks. And selfishly, he could have just taken any quarterback. It could have been any single one. It doesn't matter who. And now, again, you're looking at it like, okay, well, it's year 1. I now have year 2 with the quarterback. He still needs time. And so I just think that's another point in all this. Like I understand the frustration with not getting the quarterback this year. And people are like, he's gone 20 straight draft picks without drafting a quarterback. But it's like, okay, well, then why do we sorry, go. I want to make this one point. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Of course, we understand the frustration. If anybody listens to this podcast, Dan and I were pounding the table for Drake May the entire time. We were hoping New England hated Drake May. We were hoping that Drake May hated clam chowder. We were hoping all that shit was true so he could come to New York, and it didn't happen.
Right.
It just didn't happen. Of course, we want a freaking quarterback. But it's not that easy. And I don't want a quarterback just to get a quarterback for quarterback's sake.
I don't like that either, Nick, because look, people are like, oh, he hasn't drafted a quarterback in 20 straight draft picks. Okay, guess what? Look at NFL history, and the bust rate for quarterbacks taken on this, even in round 2, is insanely high. Round 3, round 4, round 5, these are almost always wasted draft picks where you could be getting prospects like Theo Johnson and Tracy. Will they hit? Definitely Johnson and Tracy? No, but they might hit. There's a much better chance of them hitting than any quarterback you take. So now just don't even really just focus on round 1. If you wanted the quarterback, like 20 straight draft picks. I don't want to hear that. The only picks that you should be mad about them not taking quarterback are 6 this year, 5 and 7 the year before, even though, not the year before, 2 years before that with Thibodeau and Neal. But wasn't that the Kenny Pickett class, by the way? I'm pretty sure that was, right?
Yeah.
So obviously I would hope no one would be mad about not reaching for Kenny Pickett or whoever hell else was in that draft class. And then last year, they're picking at 25. Obviously, they can't trade up for CJ Stroud, so you can't be mad at them for that. So it's not 20 straight picks where Joe Shane didn't take a quarterback. It's only really this pick, the 6th overall pick, that I think it's fair to be angry at if you want to be angry at. I'm not personally, because I didn't have a conviction on anyone but May and Caleb Williams in this class. Jaden, I would have maybe been okay with based on the upside, but I would have been very nervous about the red flags within his profile. And I'll be honest with you, I am very, very happy the Commanders took him over Drake May. I'll see what happens there. It's going to be a different developmental situation, New England versus Washington. I don't care. I'm very, very happy that they took Daniels over May, and we'll see what happens there. But look, I'm okay with the frustration over the 1 round, Nick, but everything past that, it gets a little much for me.
No, I'm right there with you. I think that was really well put, Dan.
Thank you. All right. Let's get to this next question by our boy, Bry Guy. Oh, no, sorry. I missed one, actually, from DK, from BK. He says, I may have asked this before, but I'm not sure. Given that the NFL is not a developmental league, especially at O-line, where full contact practice is limited, does that shift your preference to less athletic college seniors who spent time at Big Ten type schools versus raw athletes who need development?
On the face of it, yeah, sure. But I also think this is like a case by case type of basis. Depends on the kid's work. There are just so many variables that would go into that. So I wouldn't want to say that's a blanket type of statement. But yeah, I think generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, that does theoretically make sense. And it can also lead to the strategy that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have employed with the Giants this season, getting those veterans who have a bunch of snaps under the belt, who have the technical refinement already there and the development and the experience, bring them in, pay them the contracts to have a more competent offensive line rather than sticking the Marcus McKeithans and the Josh Azudas into positions that they probably shouldn't be in.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to factor in with regards to this question, Nick, is that yes, it's not a developmental league, but that doesn't necessarily mean take players who are productive at college, don't take players who have raw traits, because it's actually a projection league. Despite it not being a developmental league, it is a projection league. You have to project traits and how they're going to fit against NFL level competition. Because if you don't do that, That's how you're stuck with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire of a draft class, or the J.J. Arcega-Whitesides of a draft class, or the Keneal Harrys of a class. Guys who were ultra productive or at the catch point, good at college level, but don't make that jump to the speed of the NFL game based on the traits that they have. So you still have to bank on projectable traits. You just have to find the happy medium there, because like you said, you can't just take the rawest guy ever and hope he's going to develop with no snaps and he's not in the game. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, though, because if you start to just take the best college players against college competition, you're going to have a really bad team.
Brian Hefe asks, Bry guy, my guy, what's going on, buddy?
Heafy, it's got to be.
Oh, okay. Heafy. Thank you, Dan. I've left the draft disappointed, but if I'm being honest, it's not the picks, it's the process. The win while rebuilding philosophy doesn't work in my estimation. I struggle to believe the lack of trade market for X and Saquon, the locker room culture narrative. I don't know. Thoughts?
Okay, so you're not disappointed in the picks, but the process, the rebuilding philosophy doesn't work in your estimation to compete. So I understand, and I know a lot of fans like the idea of like bottoming out during a rebuild. This would mean trading Xavier McKinney and Saquon, though again, I don't think there was any market for either. If you look at the past safety trades around the deadline, it was a 4th round pick or worse for guys who were, some of whom were at the time viewed in Xavier McKinney's light. So I think you get a 4th round if you're lucky there. Barkley, I don't think you're getting much of all. I know the Panthers got a lot back from McCaffrey. Let me just be honest with everyone listening. I know there are still some people who disagree with this. The league views McCaffrey in an entirely different light than they view Saquon Barkley. And that's just the reality of the situation. Maybe if you asked them in 2018, they'd be like they're neck and neck. I may even have Barkley higher. In 2023, that's not how the league views Saquon Barkley. If you look at it, look at the contract Saquon Barkley got on the open market. He didn't get $12 million a year. He didn't get $13 million a year, which I think if McCaffrey at the same age hit the market, he would have maybe gotten that, honestly, because that's how much some teams like the Niners view a player with his receiving upside and his skill set as a receiver. And then we don't just mean, after the catch, we mean running the routes as well. And also some of the process. I think McCaffrey's a really good between the tackles runner. I think he's one of the best processing backs. I've always felt this since his Stanford days, and he's proven it on the field and on his tape. So I don't believe in that part of it. I don't really love the bottom out rebuild, because I think it's good on theory and in paper, but if you're not adding talent to your roster, like Brian Burns types, for examples, it's going to be hard for you to find it, even when you have all these draft picks. And I say this because yes, the draft picks on paper are beautiful. I have 3 first-round picks. I have a second-round pick. But draft is a crapshoot, and there's a shit ton of busts at every single round of the draft, including round 1, especially round 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I would take the proven talent, especially if it's young talent, and I'd like to build that roster up so when they do get a quarterback. Now, I agree with you, Brian. It's going to be hard to get a quarterback. There's no real solution in sight. It might have to be they luck into one. Guess what? That's how a lot of these teams do it. The Bears, you think they planned this all out 2 years ago when Ryan Poles got there? You said, I know what's going to happen. I'll do this and this and this. And out of nowhere, I'll have Caleb Williams on the roster. No, a lot of this was freaking luck for the Bears. It was. Now, you could say they made good decisions like trading back to get the Panthers 1, but they couldn't have said at the time, we're guaranteed sure we're going to get the number 1 overall pick in a Caleb Williams draft. They said, we're going to give ourselves a chance for it, but they knew when they did that the only way they got Caleb Williams is they earned the number 1 pick, because I am sure that whoever had the number 1 pick in this class was not trading it. They were taking Caleb Williams. It's going to be the same when Arch Manning comes out. They will not listen to your Godfather offer for a boatload of picks. They will take Arch Manning and go forward with Arch Manning, whoever has that number 1 pick, if Arch is what he should be, and I think he will be. So I think a lot of it is luck on the quarterback front. So I'm okay rebuilding the roster and not just being like, fuck it. Let's just throw the roster out and totally bottom out, try to get the number 1 pick.
Yeah, the Giants won a playoff game last year. They have building blocks in place. They have good players. So a complete rebuild when you have Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence and you traded for Brian Burns. Like, I don't know how wise that would be. It really came down to a pivotal point. A pivotal point was paying Daniel Jones. And we can look back at that and say that was a really bad situation, just a bad decision by the Giants brass. And we can agree with that because he didn't take the step forward that he needed to earn the money that he's being paid 100%. But once you make that decision, I think it's hard to just completely rebuild. You might as well just build up your infrastructure for whoever the quarterback is going to be once you find and locate that right guy. Is that going to be Drew Lock? I have no idea. Is it Tommy Cutlets? Come on now, right? But I don't think there was really an option for them if they didn't love J.J. McCarthy. And obviously, they did not love J.J. McCarthy like a lot of people wanted them to love J.J. McCarthy. So they went with Malik Nabers. And now next year, they will be in a position to select a quarterback if they're so inclined. It's not there's not a direct solution to the issue that they find themselves in. It's not that simple.
That's the key factor, I think, that differentiates where we're at, Nick, with this. And look, we're not guaranteed to always be on the same page, you and I, Nick. It seems like we're aligned on this and other things, but like, I feel like, we look at this independently and we try to look at every side here, Nick. And I know I can't speak for you, but I think that's what you do in your process. And in our estimation, you can't force this position. It's not how it's done, despite the fact that we both feel very strongly that the Giants need to upgrade this position to have any chance to be a real competitor for divisions and Super Bowls on a consistent basis. It doesn't mean it's easy to do or there's some kind of clear path for it. So again, I don't think that means you just throw out the roster building during that process of trying to find that quarterback. You have to get lucky to get the quarterback. You really freaking do. That's the fact of the matter on it.
The fulcrum to the whole issue is the Daniel Jones contract. And when you go back and you see what Joe Shane said as much. Look, he's 25 at the time. He's big, he's physical, he's in the building all day. He works his ass off. First year in the system, we're able to go to the playoffs and win a playoff game.
Right.
So we have to pay him after they declined his 5th-year option. Now, again, it was a mistake. If you go back, I guarantee if you go back and you listen to this podcast, though, I think we did an emergency pod when the Giants signed Daniel Jones. We weren't like, this is awesome, man. We were like, hey, man, he better freaking prove himself now. He's not on his rookie contract. And he didn't do that in his first year. And I don't think he's going to at this point that we know who Daniel Jones is.
And I want to be fair. We were probably a little more optimistic about it at the time. If you listen to that emergency pod, I don't want to
go listen to it. Like, I don't think I sat here, Dan.
I don't remember.
No, I highly doubt I sat here and was like, this is awesome. No, of course we didn't say
No. I don't think we said this was the greatest thing ever, but I think we were more optimistic about it. And I don't think that's unfair of us. I'll tell you why I say that, Nick. There were strides that he made on film in 2022 from a pocket presence standpoint. That was the biggest one to me. I felt like he was much better in the pocket in 2022. Now, did that carry over? I don't know. I also felt like there were some instances of him improving the processing a little bit post-snap. Maybe I overrated it.
Dude, one of our big things, though, even during the 2022 season, was how they had no explosive plays.
Right.
I wrote about this at Big Blue View.
We were understanding where they were coming from. But
no, we were understanding where they were coming from for the same reason why we understand what's going on right now is because there was no freaking better option.
Right. Well, there was, no, that's the thing. If that's what we thought at the time, we were probably wrong about that because the better option was the franchise tag. But it was hard to do because that meant losing Saquon Barkley because they made the right decision not to extend Saquon Barkley and pay all that cap.
My point is the better option with personnel from that standpoint. They were picking so late at that time, they could not select the player to bring in. And there was no one else on the market that they felt, I would argue Baker Mayfield at this point, but there was no one that they felt
I would argue Tyrod Taylor, to be completely honest.
Yes.
My personal opinion. I think Tyrod Taylor is a better quarterback than Daniel Jones. I stand by, but he's not, doesn't say healthy yet. And that's a problem.
Yes. And I think a lot of that was, and you were onto this really early too, but I think a lot of that was kind of displayed last season.
Yeah. It's, I know there's an argument for it again. The situations were different, blah, 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 blah.
They were different.
Factor all that in because they were different. Taylor was better on film by a considerable margin. So you want to lower the margin to factor in the supporting cast? Sure. But I mean, the offense ran so differently with him in there. It really did. And if you look at it, his EPA from clean pockets only, taking out all the plays where Jones was pressured, where Tyrod was pressured, his EPA was 8th because he was actually good when there was a clean pocket. Jones' EPA was 43rd. DeVito's EPA was 44th. There was an obvious difference from clean pockets as far as the production that actually transpired. That's not really a debate. It's not much of an opinion. It's just what happened and what didn't happen. Yep. One guy produced from clean pockets. The other guys didn't. You could say it's because he was shell-shocked. All those things, fine, whatever. But I don't think Tyrod's situation was that amazing either. It was better, but it wasn't that amazing. But this is not the point for that again. Like the point being, like they at the time they made the decision, they banked on those traits. Like you said, 25, big arm, big kid, works hard, can move, mobile, had a good season, had his best season of his career. They're taking a chance on him. Like one thing I know we said from that pod, I can't remember it fully, Nick. One thing I know we said from that emergency pod is they're giving him this contract based on a projection, not what he's done so far.
100%. Yeah.
And so that's when you make a projection, you're not always going to get that projection right. That's part of the gamble. That's going to happen for everything. They're making a projection on Brian Burns, by the way, by trading 39th and giving him that massive contract. They're projecting he'll be an even better player in Shane Bowen's system than he was with Carolina. That's another projection that they're making. These projections don't always work. Dave Gettleman projected Kenny Golladay would be the number 1 receiver Daniel Jones needed. Kenny Golladay for 3 years, $72 million, couldn't even move on a football field after signing with the Giants. Literally, did you remember those whip routes that we had to watch him run on tape?
Yeah, man.
Those are some of the saddest. No
rough.
offense to Kenny Golladay, and he was a good player before his hip surgery. But I mean, watching those whip routes, I mean, I don't know how Dave put him through a workout. Did he even work him out? Dave probably didn't even put him through a workout. Dave's like, no, come on in, Kenny. We'll give you whatever you want. Oh, you're only getting 1 year old.
What blows my mind is you told me when the Giants, I think, signed him that you knew somebody who
I said had insight. I'll say it again.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, had an insight on
my sister works within the hospital where Kenny Golladay got his surgery, and the doctors told the Giants that his hip will never be the same. They signed him anyway.
You told me that in March.
I told you that in March when they signed him
of 2021.
Yes.
And I was like, that's not good. But I was like, they have to know that, right? And they didn't.
They didn't. Or maybe they thought that he could beat that projection, right? Or that it wouldn't matter, or that he could still be an effective receiver. Or in my mind, I feel like Dave Gettleman is just flying by the hip with all these decisions and just not really factoring in. Like, I think he's just it was so unbelievably short-sighted. And maybe that's part of why Nick and I are higher on Shane than we should be. And I'm not saying that is the case, but maybe it's factoring in some post-Gettleman stress disorder or whatever you want, PTS Gettleman G, whatever it would be, Nick. And that wasn't even the right way to go it, but I don't know. By comparison, anything would be good. You're right. The process has been, you can't have a worse process than that. But yeah, I don't know. We went on a tangent here.
It's not even like that. It's like, I think Shane has done a great job. I think there's been a ton of mistakes. It's hard to overlook when you give a quarterback like Daniel Jones that contract and he doesn't take the development that is congruent with that contract. That's a freaking mistake. And that lays right at your feet. And that could be the blight that tears down the Joe Shane reputation.
Right.
And I don't think it's unfair to think that. But I also see a lot of other savvy moves that Joe Shane did that JVL Gettleman would have never did. Like trading a 2nd-round pick to the Seattle Seahawks to get freaking Leonard Williams that you leveraged to go trade for Brian Burns, that so many teams in the NFL were going around trying to get Brian Burns for so much draft capital too. And Carolina didn't want to pull the trigger on it. And the Giants were able to get him just for a 2nd-round pick. And then they gave him that contract. And he's a perfect fit for what the Giants want to do defensively. And you pair him with Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari. And that's a pretty damn good pass rush. And there's little moves like that I do support. And the pro scouting department has also done a good job locating and identifying talent and bringing them in. Even Ashawn Robinson, guy was a good player for the Giants. Bobby Okereke, good player.
Bobby Okereke, great signing. Jason
Nick
Pinnock.
McLeod, Fabian Morrell. So those are the reasons why there's enough there for me to at least say I'm not willing to just throw the baby out with the bathwater at this point, but I can still acknowledge that it hasn't been great. And I'm not sitting here saying this is a full rebuild and the Giants can suck next year. I'm not, because I still think there's an infrastructure in place to allow them to compete in a weak NFC. But I also understand that the quarterback position is the main ingredient. That is the meat and the potatoes to winning football games. And they still do not have that figured out.
Yes. And I think it's even more so the meat and potatoes to having a ceiling as a football team. You can have a low ceiling and win 7, 8, 9, 10 games if your quarterback play is not that great. I think that's really where the Giants could be at this year. I think they could. My projection for wins is probably going to be a little bit higher than Vegas at 6.5. I think the Giants are going to win between 7 and 10 games this year because I think they've done enough on their roster, and Daniel Jones can win 7 to 10 games, or Drew Lock. Either of them, I think, can win 7 to 10 games because I think the coaching is good. Like, they won 6 games last year with like the worst possible situation and outcome last year from an offensive line and quarterback standpoint. It's hard for me to believe they can't win 1 to 3 more with a much better situation.
I agree. I think you lay that out well.
Okay, that's where we'll end it here. Unfortunately, we're like only not even halfway through the doc. Not unfortunately. I love that you guys have all these questions for us. Mailbag is actually my favorite thing we do. So I'm really enjoy that every time we ask for questions, there's millions of questions. We will get to all your questions. It just might be at a different date. But for those of you who got in Mailbag 1, congrats. I'm happy to get some YouTube questions in as well. That's going to be a new thing. So check out the YouTube community page on the Big Blue Banter YouTube. You can go click community or home, and you'll see when I'm asking for mailbag questions. And then you can just reply in that thread to get your question read. For everybody else, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.